Hello, I'm Nathan Loynes, and in this short video I'm going to talk you through some of the key points that are raised in Sarah Banks's 2001 work Ethics and Values in Social Work. I'm dealing with Chapter 4, which are ethics and values in relation to social work practice and theories. I'm not going to go into the theories that are mentioned towards the back end of the chapter, and for that reason you will get a greater understanding of these key issues in general, but also the application of the theories if you consult the original text. Okay, so what were the original ethical or value base placed in social work? The relationship between the social worker and families was the focus of study, and the values which were upheld was that each person is an individual in their own right, free to make their own individual choices. Secondly, a value of freedom, that individuals must be free to self-determine their own behaviour and life course. However, in the 1970s, there was a backlash towards this taken for granted assumption about the values of social work, in that there was criticism that people were not actually individual in the true sense of the word, or free in the true sense of the word, but structural or social forces determined what individuals could or could not become in society. And this is called structural inequality. The fact that society is perceived to be unfair is by no means a new idea, and here's a famous cartoon of Beveridge, who developed policies in the post-war period, 1945 onwards, to try and reduce the social inequality inherent in British society. We'll look at this in more detail in a later lecture, but some of these inequalities outlined by Beveridge include want, which is need, ignorance, which is lack of education, disease, which is lack of adequate healthcare, squalor, which is lack of adequate housing, and idleness, which is lack of adequate work opportunities. As I say, the fact that society is unfair is not a new idea, and this is what Beveridge sought to tackle in the post-war period. However, the difference in thinking in the 1970s came from the view that social workers held of themselves and the role that they could play in addressing structural inequality. So no longer were we relying on politicians such as Beveridge to create policy and systems. The individual social worker themselves could do something to tackle inequality and oppression in society. And here we have the concept, if you like, of radical social work being born. And we can see these unfair inequalities and structural inequalities as represented by the dragon here, and social workers liking to compare themselves to the knight in shining armour, individually doing battle on a daily basis with these structural inequalities, a radical conception of social work. However, recent commentators in the 1990s and 2000s have called this radical social work idea into question. Is radical social work and challenging existing structures and existing inequalities really compatible in today's market-led economy? In other words, we have provision and systems set up, both under the Conservatives and under recently New Labour, that seek to see healthcare and social care provision as a market. The market and money dictates to some extent what is provided. Can a person such as this, an individual social worker, really challenge market forces? Does the social worker have to provide the cheapest and most cost-efficient service rather than perhaps the right service or the ethically correct solution to a family's problems? Secondly, on a psychological level, is the idea of radical social work really just a romantic illusion? How social workers prefer to think of themselves? It's not actually accurate, but it's the manner in which social workers describe their day-to-day activities in challenging authority and existing power structures. Is that really the case? Or in fact, are social workers controllers? Are social workers actually, or children and family workers, actually agents of the state? part of the machine that seeks to oppress already oppressed individuals. And there is evidence around to support this view, for example, in that why are most social work and children and family interventions aimed at low-income families? Is that because families on higher income don't experience the same problems regarding socialising children and so on? So are social workers actually puppet masters of the client who are actually the puppets? Foucault, who wrote extensively on the nature of control and authority within society, terms this idea a new authoritarianism. That although radical social work sought to see itself as new and challenging structures, it's just the same set of individual ideas about social control dressed up in a different manner. A facade, if you like. Implicit in these ideas of control and new authoritarianism are the ideas that social workers always had to juggle this dichotomy of caring for people whilst at the same time controlling people. And you can think of this as care, as providing parenting advice, versus control in controlling potentially risky or dangerous families, child protection and so on. But we can take this one step further. This idea of the social workers need to juggle care versus control can find its roots way back in Victorian times, where within the poor laws distinctions were made between the deserving poor, if you like a parent trying to do their best, versus the undeserving poor. You might view any number of people, such as a young person on an ASBO, as a member of this undeserving poor. So these are value judgments that social workers are making on a daily basis between, does this person deserve my help? And it doesn't mean that they're necessarily poor, but does that person deserve my help, or doesn't that person deserve my help? Are they deserving or undeserving? And that's a difficult ethical decision to make. In fact, is it a decision that individual social workers should be making, or should we rely on policy to determine the deserving from the undeserving? And to a large extent we currently do, and we'll explore this in a later lecture. So just to wrap up, can you identify the pervasiveness of values that run throughout the different ideas and concepts in this presentation? I'll continue to allude that values in social work and working with families run through practice like the letters in Blackpool Rock. They're not something that are just added on or bolted on or thought about as an afterthought. Rather, they form the bedrock or the basis of social work practice. Can you identify the values in this presentation? Towards the middle of the article of Sarah Banks, we come into a critical discussion of what happens when values compete against each other. How do we decide which value is going to prevail? Clearly not all values are compatible, as we'll see later on in today's session. This has led commentators to comment that social work is a fragmented discipline with competing and different values, depending on which particular theory that you're looking at. It's not a single unitary theory in the way that medicine is, for example, or even disciplines such as psychology or the law. It's a composite of lots of different disciplines. And for you as a student, this can mean that things are difficult when it comes to the area of study, because you'll often be studying things that seem to be contradictory. You'll come across one theory or one perspective of explaining human behaviour in the context of social work, which is then immediately contradicted by another theory. How are we going to decide which theory to apply at a particular moment in time and make that decision ethically? And we'll come to unpick some of these tensions and dilemmas in today's session and in future sessions. Okay, I hope you found that useful. If you want to build on some of these key ideas and signposting, I suggest that you read the Sarah Banks article and the relevant chapter in Robert Adams' book, Working with Children and Families. Okay, thank you.